My name is Stephanie Cole. I am 32 years old. I am a licensed physical therapist. And I want to tell you something that I have told very few people in the 2 years since it happened. Not because I'm ashamed of it, because shame belongs to the person who did it and not to me, but because the telling of it requires me to reconstruct a day that I spent 8 months looking forward to, and arriving at the moment in the middle of it when everything I believed about my life turned out to be something else entirely. Here's the plot twist. I'm going to tell you right now, at the beginning, because you deserve to know what you are walking into. At my own baby shower, 8 months pregnant with my first child, a woman I had never seen before walked through the door of my best friend's house, looked at me across a room full of pink balloons and flower arrangements and gift bags with tissue paper spilling out the tops, and said, "You must be Stephanie." And when I said yes, she said, "I'm Rebecca. I'm married to Nathan." And I looked at her and I said, "Nathan is my husband." And she looked at me and she said, "Nathan is my husband too." And then she reached into her bag and she pulled out a photograph. It was a wedding photograph. Nathan in a dark suit, smiling, standing next to a woman in a white dress. The woman in the photograph was Rebecca. The date printed on the photograph frame said June 14th. My wedding to Nathan had been August 3rd of the same year, 6 weeks apart. 2 weddings, 1 man. One of us pregnant with his child in a house full of pink balloons. Neither of us knowing the other existed until that moment. Welcome to Peaceful Drama Stories TV. I'm so glad you're here for this one. Subscribe, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and stay with me, because what Rebecca and I did in the weeks that followed the baby shower is the part of this story that I am most proud of, and I want to tell you all of it. Let me back up to before Nathan, because understanding who I was before him matters for understanding how I missed what I missed. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, the middle child of 3, raised by parents who had a marriage that was functional and affectionate and not particularly dramatic, which I now understand was a gift that I did not fully appreciate at the time. My father, Thomas, was a civil engineer. My mother, Carol, taught elementary school. They argued occasionally about reasonable things and resolved those arguments in a reasonable amount of time and remained married for 38 years and were, by every measure I had available to me growing up, a decent example of what 2 people choosing each other looked like over time. I absorbed that example. I believed in it. I became, as a result, the kind of person who trusted people, not blindly, not without evidence, but with the particular openness of someone whose foundational experience of love had been reliable. This is not a flaw. I want to say that clearly because one of the things I have worked through in the 2 years since the baby shower is the temptation to locate the problem in myself, in my trust, in my willingness to believe what I was told. The problem was not in me. The problem was in Nathan Cole, who lied with the particular fluency of someone who had been lying about important things for a very long time and who had built a life, 2 lives, on the assumption that the lies would hold. I met Nathan when I was 28. He was 31. He was a commercial pilot, which I mentioned not to explain the deception, because the deception does not require explaining. It requires condemning, but because his profession was the architecture on which the lies were built. He flew routes between cities on a schedule that changed monthly. He was away from home 3 to 4 nights a week in a pattern that was irregular and that he described with the comfortable authority of someone who has spent years normalizing the unpredictability of his job. He was in Pittsburgh on Tuesdays and home Thursday morning and back out Friday and in Atlanta over the weekend. The schedule made sense because pilot schedules are genuinely irregular. The absences made sense because pilot absences are genuinely frequent. I did not question the schedule because I had no reason to question the schedule. I had instead a boyfriend who called me every evening regardless of where he was, who brought me specific things from specific cities because he had been paying attention to what I mentioned liking, who met my parents at Thanksgiving and charmed them in the straightforward way of a man who is good at charming people, and who told my father, over the turkey and the cranberry sauce, that he intended to take care of me. My father had shaken his hand. My mother had cried quietly in the kitchen afterward because she said he reminded her of my father when her father first met him, which was the highest compliment she had available to give. We dated for 14 months. He proposed on a Saturday morning in our apartment, which he had moved into with me 8 months into the relationship, with a ring he had chosen himself, an oval sapphire in a simple gold setting, because I had mentioned once in passing that I found sapphires more interesting than diamonds, and he had remembered. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We were married on August 3rd, in a venue outside Richmond, with 112 guests and my grandmother's veil, and my mother's cinnamon rolls at the morning brunch, and the specific joy of a day when everything you hoped for arrives in the order you hoped for it. Nathan cried at the altar. I have thought about those tears many times since. I do not know what they meant. I know what they looked like. They looked like a man who loved his wife. What I did not know on August 3rd was that Nathan had stood at an altar 6 weeks earlier, on June 14th, in a different city, in a different venue, with a different woman in a different white dress, and had cried at that altar too, I imagine, with the same facility. What I did not know was that Rebecca Lawson had met Nathan 2 years before I had dated him for 18 months, had said yes to the same oval sapphire in the same simple gold setting, a detail I would not discover until later, but that, when I did discover it, told me more about Nathan's operational method than almost anything else. He had a system, a practiced, refined, deliberate system built on the specific geography of his job. One city where he was a husband, another city where he was also a husband, a schedule that kept the two lives sufficiently separated to function, and a phone with 2 numbers that he managed with the focus of a man who understood that the entire structure collapsed if one number ever appeared in the wrong context. I got pregnant 13 months into our marriage. Nathan was, to all observable appearances, thrilled. He came with me to appointments. He assembled the crib. He painted the nursery a pale yellow because we had decided not to find out the sex, and yellow felt neutral and warm. He chose a name from a list we made together, sitting on our couch on a Sunday afternoon with a baby name book and 2 cups of tea. He was present, attentive, and gave no indication, none, that any part of what was happening was anything other than what it appeared to be. I have spent time with that absence of indication. I have spent time wondering how a person performs presence that completely across that length of time. I have not resolved that question. I am not sure it is a question that resolves. My baby shower was organized by my best friend Danielle. It was at her house in the Fan District of Richmond, a Saturday afternoon in late October, with 31 guests including my mother and my sister and my colleagues from the physical therapy practice where I worked and friends from college and graduate school. Danielle had done everything with the particular thorough love of a best friend who has been waiting for this occasion and wants it to be everything. The flowers were white and pink and green. The food was exactly what I would have chosen myself, which is something Danielle knew, because she had been paying attention to what I liked for 11 years. I arrived at 2 p.m. feeling what I imagine most women feel at their baby shower, which is a combination of genuine joy and mild overwhelm, and the specific physical state of being 8 months pregnant, which is its own ongoing negotiation with your own body. I sat in the chair Danielle had designated the guest of honor chair with its ridiculous sash, and I received people, and I opened gifts, and I ate the food, and I felt, for those first 90 minutes, exactly as happy as I was supposed to feel. Rebecca arrived at 3:40. I did not notice her come in because there were 31 people in the room and conversations were overlapping and someone had just handed me a gift that required significant unwrapping. I was aware of a new person in my peripheral vision and I assumed it was a late arrival and I continued with the gift. It was Danielle who noticed first. I know this because she told me afterward that she saw Rebecca come in and saw her scan the room and look at me and that something in the quality of that look made Danielle start moving toward her. Not because she knew what was coming, but because she had the instinct of a person who senses that the air in a room is about to change. She was not fast enough. Rebecca crossed the room. She came to stand in front of me. I looked up from the gift I was unwrapping. She was 34 years old. She was wearing a gray coat, and she was very still in the way that people are still when they have been preparing themselves for something difficult for a long time and have finally arrived at the moment of it. She said, "You must be Stephanie." I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm Rebecca. I'm married to Nathan." And then she said the sentence that I have replayed more times than I can count. She said, "He told me you were his sister." The room went quiet. Not immediately. In waves, the way quiet spreads through a room when people register one by one that something has happened that requires attention. My mother, who was sitting 2 seats to my left, stood up. Danielle appeared at my right shoulder. I looked at Rebecca. I said, "Nathan is my husband." She said, "I know that now." She said it with the specific flatness of a person who has been living with a piece of information that has cost them something and is now delivering it because delivering it is the right thing to do regardless of the cost to themselves. She reached into her bag and she pulled out the photograph. She handed it to me. Nathan in a dark suit, smiling, standing next to a woman in a white dress, a frame with a date, June 14th. I looked at it. I looked at her. She said, "We were married in June." I said, "We were married in August." She said, "I found a photograph of your wedding on his phone in September. I have been looking for you since September." I said, "How did you find me?" She said, "His sister? Your sister-in-law, I mean, your actual sister-in-law. She told me about the shower. She told me where it was. She helped me find you." I did not say anything for a moment. The room was completely quiet. I was sitting in the guest of honor chair with the sash and the half-unwrapped gift in my lap and a photograph in my hand, and 31 people who had come to celebrate the beginning of my child's life, watching me understand that the man who was supposed to be the other parent of that child had 2 wives. I put my hand on my stomach. The baby moved. I said, "Sit down, Rebecca." She sat down. What happened next is not what you might expect. There was no screaming. There was no dramatic collapse. There was no moment of theatrical confrontation. What there was, in my best friend Danielle's living room, surrounded by pink balloons and gift bags and the 31 women who knew me best, was something quieter and more specific. Rebecca and I looked at each other across the space of what we had just understood, and we made, without discussing it, the same decision. We were not each other's problem. We were each other's witness. Danielle put a cup of tea in front of each of us. My mother sat very close to me and held my hand without saying anything, because my mother has always known when the most useful thing she can do is be physically present without adding words to the space. Rebecca and I talked quietly for 45 minutes while the rest of the shower arranged itself around us, with the particular grace of 31 women who understood that what was happening in that corner of the room was important and that their job was to give it space. Rebecca told me about Nathan in Charlotte, where she lived. I told her about Nathan in Richmond. We compared schedules. We compared stories. We compared the oval sapphire rings on our hands, which were identical because of course they were, because Nathan had a system, and the system had included ordering the same ring twice from the same jeweler, a fact I verified later through the jeweler's records, a detail that is so operational, it still makes me slightly cold when I think about it. We compared wedding photographs, hers on her phone, mine on mine, and saw 2 ceremonies with the same grooms 6 weeks apart in different cities with different guests, and no overlap, no common person who attended both, no possibility of accidental discovery built into the architecture of the deception. He had been meticulous. He had been completely meticulous. And he had still been undone, not by a mistake he made, but by a choice his own sister made. Because Nathan had told his sister about the shower, one of the few people who knew about both marriages, and his sister had called Rebecca, whom she had known and cared about for 2 years before Nathan married me, and had said, "I think you need to know something. I want to tell you about Nathan's sister before I tell you what happened with Nathan, because she matters to this story, and I do not want her to be a footnote. Her name is Jennifer Cole. She is 38 years old. She is a nurse practitioner in Charlotte. She had known about Rebecca for 2 years before Nathan met me. She had not known he had married Rebecca until after the wedding. She had not known about me until Nathan mentioned casually that his wife in Richmond was pregnant. The phrase his wife in Richmond said casually at a family dinner was the moment Jennifer understood the full architecture. She called Rebecca the same night. Rebecca found the wedding photograph the following day. Jennifer told me all of this when I called her, the week after the baby shower, with a directness and a steadiness that I recognized as someone who had been carrying something heavy and was relieved to set it down. She said, "I am so sorry." She said, "I did not know how to handle it and I waited too long and I am sorry for that." I said, "You handled it?" She said, "Not soon enough." I said, "You handled it." That is where I left it with her. Not because I had no other feelings about the timeline, but because Jennifer was not the person responsible for the harm, and I was not going to spend my energy in the wrong direction. I called an attorney before I called Nathan. Her name is Margaret Forsyth. She is 57 years old. She practices family law in Richmond, and she has, across 30 years of practice, developed a manner that is simultaneously warm and completely without sentimentality, which is exactly what I needed in the week after my baby shower. I told her the situation. She asked 3 questions. She then said, "You need to understand several things." She said, "Bigamy is a crime in Virginia. The second marriage, your marriage, is legally void because Nathan was already legally married to Rebecca at the time of your ceremony." She said this affects the legal status of your marriage, but does not affect your rights as the parent of your child, which are entirely separate and fully intact. She said, you have several avenues available, civil claims, a criminal complaint if you choose to pursue it, and we need to discuss the paternity documentation and custody framework before your child is born, which I understand is approximately 6 weeks away. She said, how are you feeling? I said, I am 6 weeks from my due date, and I just found out my husband has another wife. She said, yes. She said, that's a great deal to carry at this particular moment. She said, let's make sure you don't have to carry the legal part alone. I said, thank you. She said, come in tomorrow morning. I'll make time. I told Nathan by text. Not because I was afraid of him. I was not afraid of him. But because Margaret had advised that any direct communication with him be documented. And because I wanted what I said to him to be something I had considered, not something produced in real time by emotion. The text was 5 sentences. I know about Rebecca. I know about June 14th. My attorney is Margaret Forsyth. All communication should go through her office from this point forward. Do not come to this house. He read it. The 2 blue check marks appeared, and then for 27 minutes, there was no response. Then he called. I did not answer. He called again. I did not answer. He sent a text that said, Stephanie, please let me explain. I did not reply. He sent another text that said, it isn't what you think. I sent that screenshot to Margaret. He drove to Richmond that evening. He parked outside the house. He did not come to the door. He sat in his car for 40 minutes. I watched from the upstairs window with my hands on my stomach and my phone in my hand with Margaret's number already pulled up. He left at 10:15. He did not come back. Margaret filed the necessary documents the following week. Rebecca and I had dinner together for the first time 10 days after the baby shower. She drove from Charlotte. We ate at a restaurant near my apartment because I was 6 weeks from delivery and driving long distances was not something I was doing. We sat across a table from each other, 2 women who had both believed they were the only person in a specific man's life, and we talked for 3 hours, not about Nathan, about ourselves. She was a graphic designer. She had 2 cats. She had been trying to understand, across the weeks since she found the photograph on his phone, whether there had been anything she had missed, any signal she had not read correctly, any moment where the truth had been available if she had looked. I told her I had been doing the same thing. We agreed after 3 hours of dinner that we had not missed anything, that the architecture was designed to be invisible, that the person who had deceived us was skilled at deception in the way that people are skilled at things they have been doing for a long time, with serious consequences for being caught, that our failure, if it could be called that, was the failure of trusting someone who had committed entirely to being trustworthy, which is not a failure at all, but simply the cost of being a person who extends trust to the people they love. That the correct location for the blame was with Nathan, precisely and entirely, and that we were going to refuse to locate any part of it in ourselves. We paid the check. We hugged outside the restaurant. She drove back to Charlotte. I drove 3 minutes to my apartment and sat on my couch and watched television until I fell asleep. And in the morning, I got up and made coffee and went to work because I am a physical therapist and my patients needed me, and the work was something I could do well regardless of everything else. My daughter was born 6 weeks after the baby shower. Her name is Nora. She was born on a Tuesday morning in December, 7 pounds 4 ounces, with her eyes open and a specific quality of alertness that the delivery nurse described as she's already paying attention. She was handed to me and I held her and I thought, she has no idea. She has no idea what preceded her. She only knows this moment, this room, this light, these hands. I had read somewhere that newborns can smell their mother and orient toward that smell, and I held her and I thought, she knows me. Whatever else happened and whatever else is coming, she already knows me. My mother was there. Danielle was there. Jennifer, Nathan's sister, sent flowers. Rebecca sent a card that said, she's going to know how loved she is. I kept the card. Nora is 2 years old now. She walks and she runs and she has opinions about her socks that she communicates with great passion. She is the clearest thing in my life. Nathan's legal situation was resolved through the Virginia courts. The bigamy case was pursued by the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, not by me, because bigamy is a crime against the state and not a personal charge to press. He pleaded guilty. The consequences were what they were, and they are on record, and I am not going to spend time on them here, because Nathan Cole is not the point of this story. The point is Nora, who is 2 years old and does not yet know what preceded her. The point is Rebecca, who sat across from me at a restaurant table and agreed with me that we were not going to locate the blame in ourselves. The point is Jennifer, who made a phone call she was afraid to make because it was the right thing to do. The point is Danielle, who put a cup of tea in front of two women who needed one without being asked. The point is my mother, who held my hand at the baby shower without saying anything because she knew the most useful thing she could do was be physically present. And the point is me, sitting in a guest of honor chair with a sash and a half-unwrapped gift and a photograph in my hand, making the decision in that moment not to collapse but to say, "Sit down, Rebecca, let's talk." I made that decision. I am glad I made it. Nora does not know this story yet. She will know it eventually, in the age-appropriate and honest way that children deserve to know the true stories of their own origins. When she does, I'm going to tell her that the most important thing that happened at her baby shower was not the pink balloons or the gift bags or the flower arrangements. It was two women who had been deceived by the same person choosing to be honest with each other in the same room and deciding together what came next. I think that is a good beginning for a life. I think Nora will understand that when she is old enough too. That is my story. One baby shower, one photograph, and two women sitting down together to figure out the truth. Subscribe to Peaceful Drama Stories TV, drop a comment below, and I will see you in the next one.